Picture medieval Europe, and you probably think of swords and shiny knights. But the real story is way smarter than that. The Middle Ages were basically one long arms race. As armor got tougher and castles got stronger, people came up with weapons that didn't just hit harder, they solved problems. How do you stop a cavalry charge? How do you crack a stone wall? How do you beat someone wrapped in metal without getting yourself wrecked? In this list, we're looking at 12 medieval weapons that were so clever, they didn't just win fights, they changed how wars were planned and fought. Let's jump straight into number 1, the couched lance. A lance sounds simple, just a long spear for a guy on a horse, until you see the clever part, the way it was used. Early medieval riders could jab with spears, sure, but the real game changer was couching the lance under the arm, so the whole horse and rider combo hit like one solid unit. Add a high-backed saddle that kept you planted, stirrups that let you brace, and later, even a little lance rest on the armor, and suddenly cavalry wasn't just fast, it was shock force. That one idea helped turn the mounted knight into a battlefield problem everybody had to plan around. Infantry didn't just stand there and hope. They adapted with tighter formations, longer spears, better timing, and nasty surprises like ditches, stakes, and broken ground meant to ruin a charge. It also pushed armor design forward. If you're going to slam into people at speed, you need protection that can handle impacts, not just cuts. So mail, padding, and later plate all become part of the same arms race. And socially it mattered too. The knight's role wasn't only about personal bravery, it was tied to a very specific military technology. The horse, the saddle, the training, the gear, the whole package. Once armies built plans around that kind of heavy cavalry hit, warfare across medieval Europe basically had to speak cavalry, whether you loved knights or hated them. Number 2, the longbow. The longbow didn't look fancy, and that's what makes it scary. No gears, no crank, no complicated mechanics. Just a tall bow with a heavy draw that demanded real strength and years of practice. The clever part wasn't a secret trick. It was the decision to build an entire military system around massed archers who could fire fast, keep firing, and turn the sky into a problem. In places like Wales and then England, longbowmen became a serious strategic investment. You couldn't improvise this weapon in a week. Medieval governments literally pushed practice because the skill took time, and once you had it, it changed what safe distance even meant on a battlefield. At the big famous battles, Crécy in 1346, Poitiers in 1356, Agincourt in 1415, longbow fire helped break up enemy attacks by disrupting formations, smashing morale, and punishing anyone stuck in mud, narrow lanes, or bad timing. And it forced a ripple effect. Better armor, better shields, smarter movement, more emphasis on terrain, and tactics that tried to stop archers from setting up comfortably. People sometimes argue about how easily arrows punched through armor, and the truth is, it depended on distance, angle, quality, and luck. But even when armor held, the longbow still did its job by turning an organized advance into a messy, stressful, exhausting scramble. And once you've made getting across open ground feel like walking through a storm, you've already changed warfare. Number 3, the crossbow. If the longbow was about lifelong skill, the crossbow was about engineering shortcuts. That's the clever part. You could hand this to someone with far less training and still get serious power and accuracy. A crossbow stored energy mechanically, and that meant you didn't need the same kind of full-body technique a longbow demanded. Cities loved them, militias used them, and professional mercenaries made careers with them. On castle walls, crossbows were basically made for the job: steady aim, strong shot, and the ability to keep defenders effective behind cover. In the field, crossbow units could be deadly too, especially when paired with support troops who protected them during reloads. Reloading was the trade-off. More power usually meant more time. Different systems existed: simple belt hooks, lever devices, cranks, and the heavier the bow, the more help you needed to draw it. There's also that famous moral panic around crossbows. In 1139, the Second Lateran Council condemned the use of crossbows against Christians. Not a perfect ban, and not consistently enforced. Which tells you something. people saw it as a weapon that let ordinary soldiers threaten high-status warriors in armor. Whether that fear was fully justified or not, the social impact was real. The crossbow helped shift combat away from a world where elite training was everything, toward a world where equipment and organized units could level the playing field. And once warfare starts rewarding mass production and standardized gear, it's very hard to go back. Number 4. The Hussite war wagon. This one is the ultimate medieval work smarter move, turning everyday wagons into mobile fortresses. In the early 1400s, during the Hussite Wars in Bohemia, commanders used wagons linked into defensive lines, often called a wagon fort or wagenburg, and built a battlefield position that could be set up surprisingly fast. The clever part wasn't just hiding behind wood. These wagons became fighting platforms for mixed teams. Shooters, including early handguns and crossbows, polearm soldiers, and support crews. Instead of meeting armored knights in a straight-up clash, you made the battlefield awkward. Cavalry charges hate obstacles. Horses don't want to slam into a wall of timber, wheels, chains, and sharp points, especially when people behind it are launching missiles into the chaos. The wagon fort also let less elite troops survive long enough to be effective. It was like saying, "We're not trying to out-knight the knights. We're making a space where knights can't do knight things." And that idea, using simple, repeatable defensive systems to neutralize expensive elite troops, shows up again and again later in military history. It's also a reminder that medieval warfare wasn't just swords and honor. It was logistics, planning, improvisation, and a lot of how do we stop that terrifying thing from reaching us? War wagons didn't replace open field battles, but they proved that clever organization could flip the script on armies that assumed heavy cavalry would always decide the day. Number 5. The pike. If knights were the big problem for infantry, the pike was one of the cleanest answers ever invented. You can't ride through this. A pike is basically a very long spear, and the clever part is what happens when you give thousands of them to disciplined troops and teach them to move like one creature. In the late medieval period, especially with Swiss and other European infantry traditions, pike formations became a serious force. Length mattered. A short spear is great up close, but a pike creates a whole no-go zone in front of the formation. Cavalry can't easily penetrate it without losing momentum, getting separated, or simply refusing to go in. And even enemy infantry had to respect it, because stepping into a hedge of points is a bad idea no matter how brave you feel. What really made pikes change warfare was how they turned common soldiers into strategic weapons. A well-drilled pike square could hold ground, advance, and force opponents to react. That pushed armies to invest more in training and unit cohesion, not just heroic individuals. It also influenced combined arms thinking. Pikes worked best when supported by other troops who could deal with threats pikes weren't great at handling, like close-in fighting or missile harassment. Over time, pike tactics blended with firearms, and you get a bridge between medieval and early modern warfare. But even in the medieval context, the message was loud and clear. The battlefield belongs to whoever can keep formation under pressure. Number 6. The halberd. The halberd is what you get when someone looks at a spear, an axe, and a hook and says, "Why not all three?" It's one of the most practical medieval weapons ever, and the clever part is its built-in versatility. On one end, you've got a spike for thrusting, which matters because thrusts are great for reaching and controlling distance. Then, you've got an axe blade that can deliver heavy chopping force. And on many designs, there's a hook or beak that lets you yank, snag, and manipulate an enemy's weapon or armor. That last part is underrated. Medieval combat wasn't always about clean Hollywood swings. It was crowded, chaotic, and full of grappling, shoving, and trying to unbalance someone. The halberd is perfect for that messy reality. It became a favorite among infantry and city militias because it was effective without requiring the expensive lifestyle of a knight. And it shows up all over late medieval Europe, including in the hands of Swiss troops who developed a reputation for hard-hitting infantry tactics. In tight formations, halberds could reach over shoulders. In looser fights, they could control space and punish mistakes. The halberd also signals something bigger. As armor improved, weapons evolved into tools designed to exploit openings, create leverage, and force errors. Instead of searching for one perfect strike, you use a weapon that gives you options. That mindset, flexibility over flash, wins a lot of medieval fights. Number 7, the poleaxe. If you want the knight weapon that actually fits the reality of late medieval armored fighting, it's the poleaxe. This was a close to mid-range weapon designed specifically for fighting people in serious armor, often on foot. The clever part is that it's basically a custom toolbox for the job. A typical poleaxe head might combine an axe blade, a hammer face, and a spike. Why? Because armor laughs at some attacks and hates others. Cutting edges are great against unarmored targets, but plate armor is built to deflect and absorb. So the poleaxe gives you impact force from the hammer side, hooking or chopping ability from the axe side, and a thrusting threat from the spike. It's not about one swing ends it. It's about controlling an armored opponent, breaking their rhythm, and taking away their comfort. In real armored combat, footwork, balance, and leverage matter a lot, and the poleaxe supports all of that. It also shows up in fighting manuals from the late Middle Ages, which tells you it wasn't just a random battlefield stick, it was a respected, taught weapon. The poleaxe became a symbol of the late medieval transition. Knights still mattered, but they increasingly fought as disciplined units and often dismounted, especially in rough terrain or set-piece battles. When everyone is armored and stubborn, you need weapons built for that world, and the poleaxe fits it perfectly. Number 8, the warhammer and beaked pick. Here's the blunt truth about armor. If you can't slice through it, you try to overwhelm it with concentrated force. That's where the warhammer and the beaked pick come in. The clever part is simple physics. Instead of spreading your energy across a wide cutting edge, you focus it into a small point or a narrow impact surface. A hammer face can deliver a shocking blow that stresses armor and the body underneath without needing a clean cut. A beak, sometimes called a crow's beak in modern descriptions, adds a nasty grabbing, puncturing pressure point that can threaten weak spots and force reactions. These weapons show up more as plate armor becomes common, because they're a direct response to the protection trend. And they weren't only for knights. Infantry could use them too, especially in close fights where you're trying to disable an opponent quickly. Another clever angle is psychological. When people realize their armor doesn't make them untouchable, their confidence changes. That affects how they advance, how they hold formation, how they commit to an attack. Warhammers and picks also weren't necessarily huge and clunky. Many were compact enough to carry alongside other weapons. That matters because medieval soldiers often mixed tools depending on the situation. In a world where defense kept improving, this weapon family basically said, "Fine, we'll stop playing the cutting game and start playing the force game." And once that idea takes hold, you see it echoed in later weapons too, right up into gunpowder era thinking, where penetration and impact dominate design. Number 9, the rondell dagger. This one looks small compared to polearms and bows, but it's one of the smartest weapons of the armored age. A rondell dagger is typically stiff, narrow, and built for control rather than slicing. The clever part is that it treats armor like a puzzle. Instead of trying to defeat the strongest plates, it targets the places armor can't completely seal: joints, gaps, and openings needed for movement and vision. In late medieval combat, especially when armored fighters ended up in close contact, grappling and wrestling became part of the reality. If two opponents crash together, weapons get tangled, space disappears, and suddenly the fight becomes about leverage, balance, and finding an opening. That's where a dagger becomes a practical last-step tool, small enough to use in tight space, rigid enough to apply pressure, and easy to carry. You'll also hear about the misericord, often associated with mercy or finishing a fallen opponent. But the broader point is this: daggers weren't just backup weapons. In the right moment, they were the right tool. The rondell dagger also shows how medieval warfare wasn't purely about strength. It rewarded calm, technique, and knowing what actually works against the armor in front of you. And on a bigger scale, it reflects how arms and armor pushed each other towards specialization. The more advanced the protection became, the more fighters needed weapons that could exploit the few remaining vulnerabilities. Number 10. The trebuchet. Medieval people didn't have modern math classes and engineering software, but they absolutely understood leverage, weight, and what happens when you scale an idea up. The trebuchet is basically that understanding turned into a siege monster. The clever part is the counterweight. Instead of relying on twisted ropes or muscle power alone, a trebuchet uses gravity and a heavy weight dropping to swing a long arm, launching a projectile with serious force. It's a beautiful, brutal bit of engineering, and it changed siege warfare because it made castles and city walls answerable in ways earlier engines struggled to match. Defenders could still do plenty: repair, counterfire, reinforce, sortie out and burn equipment. But the trebuchet raised the stakes. Sieges were no longer only about starving a place out. Attackers could methodically batter a fortification, target towers, and pressure defenders into mistakes. It also became a symbol of power. Building and operating big siege engines demanded resources: timber, rope, skilled labor, transport, and time. That meant kings and well-funded lords could bring infrastructure to war, not just men. And once siegecraft becomes an arms race, defensive architecture responds. Better layouts, smarter wall designs, stronger gates, improved ditch systems. Even before cannons fully took over, the trebuchet pushed the medieval world toward the idea that engineering wins wars just as much as bravery does. Number 11. The bombard cannon. The moment gunpowder artillery shows up in a serious way, medieval fortifications start living on borrowed time. Bombards were early large cannons, often massive, heavy pieces used mainly in sieges. And the clever part is that they didn't care about the old rules. High stone walls had been designed to resist ladders, rams, mining, and missile fire. But repeated cannon impacts could crack and break masonry in a way that made traditional castle design feel suddenly outdated. Early cannons weren't perfect. They could be slow to load, tricky to move, and sometimes unreliable. But the direction of history was obvious. If you can bring a wall down faster than the defender can repair it, you've changed the whole logic of siege warfare. This is why you see late medieval and early modern fortifications evolve toward thicker walls, lower profiles, angled designs, and more earthworks. Even when castles remained important, their classic tall, thin look became more of a statement than a practical answer to artillery. Bombards also reshaped logistics. An army that moved cannons had to move powder, shot, spare parts, and skilled crews. That encouraged more centralized, organized states and more professional military planning. And socially, it shifted power toward rulers who could afford expensive hardware and supply chains. The bombard isn't just a weapon. It's a sign that war was becoming industrial in spirit, still medieval in culture, but heading toward a future where money, manufacturing, and logistics would matter as much as knights. Number 12. The handgun. The handgun, early handheld gunpowder firearms, looked awkward compared to a bow or crossbow, and that's exactly why it's so important. The clever part is what it promised: serious stopping power with less training time than elite archery. Early handguns had drawbacks: slow firing, lots of smoke, rough accuracy, and complicated handling compared to a simple bow. But they also had a huge advantage: they scaled with technology. As ignition systems improved, eventually leading toward matchlocks and beyond, and as powder quality and metalworking got better, firearms got more reliable and more useful. Even in their early forms, handguns changed how battles felt. Noise, smoke, and sudden impacts added a psychological edge that mattered more than people admit. And tactically, guns fit well into mixed formations. If pikes were your keep-out fence, handgunners became one of the ways you punished anyone who hovered just outside that fence. Over time, firearms helped tip warfare toward professional drill and standardized equipment, because coordinated volleys and disciplined movement were more valuable than individual showmanship. It's also one of the clearest examples of medieval warfare sliding into a new era without a clean break. You still had knights. You still had swords. You still had sieges with ladders and arrows. But once handheld gunpowder weapons become common, the long-term direction is set. Armor, tactics, and even the idea of who can be an effective soldier start shifting, because the battlefield is beginning to reward technology and organization over tradition.